The next morning I woke up, I felt as if my ribs had been kicked.
Yes.
Because you'd laughed so much.
No, I mean,
he was very, very...
No question. I mean, I can remember sitting in Martin's kitchen in London, actually weeping with laughter. I mean, actually, there's not very many people that actually caused tears of laughter to run down my face, but Christopher would do that.
He once said about you, though, he said that the thing, lots of things he said about you, but one was that he said that, about friendship, he said that your love of language took precedence over your love of friendship.
I've been thinking about this. When he came from America to England on visits, he used to ring from the airport and say, the hitch has landed.
Is that what would he call himself, the hitch?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Self-conscious irony.
And I would feel great excitement, but also the sense that I'm going to lose a chapter here, the chapter's worth of work. And you'd have these amazing long lunches, followed by a debauch in the evening that would leave you completely incapacitated for three days and three nights. But he would go off, just as you were sort of falling on your bedroom floor, he would go off and write a piece. And his generosity with time was amazing, that he would give time. He was a person for whom the clock hands moved slower. His day was longer than ours. And his energy on your behalf, which I experienced too, was extraordinary. And he'd get on a plane and come and deal with it, you know.
Yeah.
And I just, if you're a novelist or a poet, then you're going to spend a lot of time brooding. And I think that's why Hitch could not have been a novelist, although he had the gift of phrase and of mimicry and all the rest. But he wasn't a brooder, I don't think.
No, none of that determined stupor.
He did
determined stupor.
It's what V.S. Pritchett denounced Maddox Ford for not having. The great novelists have the capacity for determined stupor. I always thought.
Christopher was, in that sense, he was a journalist. He had that sort of file your copy approach, you know, and he would, as Martin says, he'd go home after a long day of drinking and
lots of
you know, and he'd write like 3,000 words and file them.
Or you'd fall asleep in his apartment.
And they would not be incoherent, they'd be extraordinary words. I mean, that was...
One of his later utterances in writing was that he did burn the candle at both ends, and he said, and sometimes that gives off a lovely light. But by Christ, he did that. In a sort of preternatural way, I always saw it.
And I think knew that it contributed to the illness that came upon him.
If you had known that there was a possibility of getting cancer, you would never have you've never smoked a cigarette, you would have never drank or consumed the amount of liquor you consumed.
No, I think all the time I've felt that life is a wager, and that I probably was getting more out of leading a bohemian existence as a writer than I would have if I didn't. So, and writing is what's important to me, and anything that helps me do that, or enhances and prolongs and deepens and sometimes intensifies argument and conversation is worth it to me, sure. So I was knowingly taking a risk. I wouldn't recommend it to others.
But he believed that the cigarettes and the booze gave him what he called a kind of junk energy. Junk energy.
Right.
And so in a sense, he was under the impression that he needed those two substances as boosters.
Might not have written as much if he hadn't had that junk energy?
As boosters.
Part of the tragedy was that he was so robust. If he'd just been a little weaker physically, he could have taken all that drinking and smoking, all that rump and whatever the word is in Hindi that means...
Or drinking and smoking at the same time.
Romany. For all the drinking, he had one of the best memories of anyone
I mean,
around.
he did have this
Incredible
ridiculous head for drink, and I don't think it did him that much good.
No, the body didn't give him enough warning signs.
I think he said about you, James, that somehow after that you awakened in him the far buried and dangerous lust for alcohol and nicotine.
Oh, it's your fault.
Ah.
Yeah, I know. He's often accused me of that, simply because I bought him a drink in the King's Arms in 1967. I mean, this really seems a bit in excess of the facts.
I want to talk about two things. I will come back to this nature of friendship. I mean, you and I have spoken about this before at this table. The notion of, I mean, I think there was a quote in which he said something about, he called the relationship he had with you the most heterosexual relationship that one young man could conceivably have with another. And you said at the same time, it was an unconsummated gay marriage.
Martin.
I didn't know it was unconsummated.
Or that there was a marriage.
That's
A civil partnership.
Martin.
Yeah,
Come
Martin.
Put your cards on the table.
Yeah.
He tried to
You shouldn't be
consummate it every now and
ashamed of all
then.
this.
Yeah, he tried to consummate it every now and then.
Well, he was sort of pan-affectionate.
Yeah.
He,
Big kisses.
big, yeah, tongues.
Yeah. I know it was.
Too much information.
No, it's not.
This is a family show.
And
Idea show.
you know, you say that he sort of lasered in on Wolfowitz, and he would perhaps do that for an hour or two. But he was the most egalitarian of socialites.
You're changing the subject, aren't you?
Well, I have no case to answer. And he was very rude, as we said, and a talented hater and all the rest. But socially, his manners were impeccable and completely democratic too.
But may I just stay with this for a couple moments?
Sure. Yeah.
One was that he cast himself as this smaller fish swimming alongside a great white shark. He did say that about you. Now that had to do with, you know,
The ladies.
the ladies. Of course,
Oh,
it did.
right,
Yes.
right,
He
yeah.
said he was a
Success at
smaller
parties,
fish
I
casting
think.
alongside a great white shark. Speaking of you.
Well, he was incredibly unpredatory as a...
Unpredatory.
Yeah.
Right.
Girls would often throw themselves at him, and
For a good reason.
well, yeah, I mean, he was
Attractive.
very attractive,
You know,
and
brilliant.
as you know, what he would do to charm people was to turn his intelligence on them and show his intelligence, and that was his way of attracting people. But he was very diffident.
Yeah, but at the same time, was he Nicholas in your novel?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
And so there was Nicholas, and you were Keith, and
Yeah,
you know?
so, yeah, up to a point. Yeah. In as much as you know, once they're in a novel, the character changes to fit the novel.
Yeah.
So it never is the person himself. But there was one story that's in the novel that I thought was so great that I had to make a scene to give the punchline that Hitch gave, which was we were in one of these empty Greek restaurants, and two very upper-class young men came in, and they were fussing around with the waiters, and they had a terrible air about them, as if they were, you know, stoically awaiting the deaths of elderly relatives so that they could come into their patrimony. And they were fussing around, so much so that it was impossible for Hitch and me to start a conversation. And then one of them came and crouched down in front of us and pouted up through his fringe and said, they were obviously going to ask us to move tables, but he said, you're going to hate me for this. And Hitch said, I hate you already.
Oh, go ahead.
And we moved tables quite genially, and they sent over a terrified bottle of wine. And, but if you just sort of introduce him to your mother and your crazy aunts and so on, he would be absolutely impeccable and gentle socially.
Let me raise this question about America. What did America mean to him? Because he obviously came here and became an American citizen.
I think he found his full voice. I think here. I think, you know, because I mean, as we heard in one of the clips you showed, I think he was actually very admiring of aspects of America, of its constitution,
And he became a naturalized citizen at the Jefferson Memorial.
Yeah, and he became even more of an American post 9/11. I mean, 9/11 was a turning point, a revamping of his love for the United States. If you went to see him in his apartment, he'd love to take strangers up onto the roof and point out the monuments as if he'd built them himself.
Yeah.
I mean, he was very proprietorial. It was his Washington too.
And as he was saying on that clip, he was very moved by the American Revolution. He thought this was a revolution that had worked.
Yeah.
And I think he loved the fact that it's an immigrant society and the diversity that follows.
In this book, Hitch 22, he writes about the first 3 chapters, and he talks about, actually, in the one edition, this photograph in which I think it was described, and I should give credit to the photographer.
Angela Gorgas.
Yes.
He was described as the late Christopher Hitchens, which gave him, or provided for him, or was an impetus for him, or forced him, or linked him to consider mortality. And he sort of talks about this in the first 3 chapters here. So let's talk finally about sort of the end and how he handled death. And each of you visited him and saw him and talked to him. So did I, in terms of an interview. When I went to do the interview, he was obviously not feeling well. And I said, Hitch, we don't have to do this now. I'll come back another time. He said, no, I want to do it now. He had a bucket next to him. And he's talked about that too. I mean, and the evolution of the conversation, it seems to me, and correct me because you were 1,000 times closer than I was from, in terms of the illness, was sort of metaphysical, and then it became, in his writings, describing the physicality of it. And then perhaps somewhere else.
Yeah,
How did he approach dying?
Well, just to say at the very beginning of it, I mean, when Hitch 22 came out, its publication event was here at the 92nd Street Y, and I had agreed to go and lob questions at him, and so I did, and he was at his best. He was at his kind of
knocking him out of the park.
His Hitchens' best, exactly. I mean, I wasn't just throwing softballs. There were a few curveballs in there, but he was brilliant for at least an hour, and then a bit more with the Q&A, and then afterwards there was a dinner for him and with a few friends and publishing people and so on, and he continued, to just hold forth and be at his absolute peak. And then afterwards, I discovered, as we all did, that was the day.
That morning he had
been told about the cancer, and I just thought, how do you do that? I mean, I wouldn't be able to do that, I don't think, to go out there in front of 1,000 people and just perform brilliantly when you've just been given, possibly terminal news.
A death sentence.
A death sentence.
One way he dealt with death was to write so well about it. I mean, you remember those early pieces for Vanity Fair, in his column, described really in terms of crossing a border, the border guards being the medics who greet you as you come across, and suddenly you're in different clothes, and the land of the healthy that you leave behind. It was beautifully done at the very beginning. Visiting him was, well, I mean, we all went. It was not like visiting most others, because he didn't want to talk about being ill. He wanted to talk about reading and what was going on and everything else. And then he needed to sleep a lot, and he'd like to find you there when he woke up. So the deal was, if you went to visit Hitch, you'd take some books and some work, sit at the foot of the bed and wait a couple of hours till he come round, stir, empty his lungs disgustingly, and then resume. Incredible appetite. He really did not want to die. He really, I mean, for all sorts of reasons, but he really did hang on.
I think that going on writing till almost the very end was actually one of the ways of resistance. I think it was one of the things that kept him going.
I took a picture of him writing that last piece on Chesterton, sort of drips. And I mean, if you think about it, it was painful to swallow, very difficult to breathe. His limbs ached, his arm hurt like crazy, and he was facing eternal oblivion, and he needed to get these 3,000 words down.